Shut up, compressor.
Yeah, low shape proposed. Repeat that low approach. Short descent to low initial breakout present position re-enter for departures.
Hey everyone, Matt here with Duke's Models, and welcome to episode 2 of the Weasel-Off, the ongoing comparative look between the Meng and Zoukei-Mura F4G Wild Weasels. Last time we looked at the kit's ejection seats. This time we are looking at the Weasel pits. Now that both cockpits have been completed, we can take a decent look at them and kind of see how they compare. So let's go ahead and zoom right in, shall we? So first, it should be noted that the Zoukei-Mura cockpit is kitted out with the Red Fox SWS 3D decal upgrade package. So it looks shit hot in part because of that. However, it also has several things going for it in terms of just general complexity. The surface detail that was removed in order to make way for these decals was also impressive in its own right. I mean, not the most amazing I've ever seen, but it's a good, sturdy, well done detail level. Basically kind of like what it was with the seats, where it's like, yeah, the rivet detail was there, blah, blah, blah. Not going to compete with aftermarket, but it's pretty damn good for injection plastic. Beyond the level of detail of the instrument panels and things like that, there is the level of detail put into everything else in the cockpit. So let me get a thing to point with here. So for example, you have the little canvas section around the control stick base down here. You have the engravings in the sidewalls over here, you can see. You have, the actual, like, patterning on the rudder pedals, which nobody gives a fuck about rudder pedals, but it's there. You have detail on the pilot's bulkhead. You have the various boxes back here. I think this is like a map case. So, yeah, it's got shit going on. You have detail on the floor. A lot of that is completely hidden by the ejection seats, but whatever, it's still there. Back here you have, separate boxes. You've got the circuit breakers going on over here. And you've got the most distinctive thing about the Zoukei-Mura, it's got the cockpit sill integrated into the cockpit and basically is the mounting point for the rear control panel. I would also note, this will come up, that there is rear-facing detail on the Zoukei-Mura rear station, which, if you look at a real Phantom, if you look at the references, it's just a rat's nest of cables in this mid-cockpit area. So that kind of sets you up to recreate that if you are so inclined. Now, looking at the Meng actually shares a lot of, even though it's a rather simpler cockpit, and does not have the same level of detail pretty much anywhere, it does have a similar breakdown for the most part. These side consoles are separate parts, just like on the Zoukei-Mura kit. The instrument panel kind of seats into place the same way. The mid bulkhead and the ejection rails for the seats sit the exact same way. Even the rear, they're slightly different mounts, but they're pretty close. The rear instrument panels are probably the biggest departure. This one is kind of like a two-piece affair. Like the center blue screen down there is sitting on the cockpit floor. Everything else kind of like comes down around it. Whereas this is all one thing. This, you may also see, has the curved roof, which connects directly up to that mid canopy area. And the Zoukei-Mura one does not, because that curved roof portion actually glues into the mid canopy arch thing. So some slight differences in engineering approach. You also notice it's a lot fatter because it incorporates the gear bay, and the Ming does not. So some slight differences, but again, not that major. Overall, I would say that the Zoukei-Mura has to get the nod just for the level of detail, the level of busyness going on, the complexity. But the engineering breakdown is still such that if you wanted to, you could take these side consoles or take the instrument panels or whatnot and basically build your own replacements in CAD and 3D print them and just have them be drop fits without having to replace the whole fucking cockpit and sand the sidewalls all to hell and that fun bullshit. It also has, and this is a significant advantage if you care about these kind of things, it has sidewall detail. Not much, but it's got some. And I should add that something that hasn't been added yet, but will be in the near future, is the various little, there's a mount right here for one. There's another one kind of up here under the sill, basically for the canopy release handles, which are just completely absent on the Meng kit. So again, Zoukei-Mura really comes through in all those little details that add to a sense of busyness. And the Meng kind of, it's like, fuck it, not my job. So that basically, it ultimately which one you prefer comes down to how much you really care about the level of detail and the sense of busyness. With the Meng, you're not getting much out of the box, but again, the way it's engineered, you can scratch build and scratch print a whole lot of shit. Now, there's one final thing to consider that I think brings these closer to a draw, and that is how they are engineered to install. So let's move the Zoukei-Mura out of the way and let's look at the Meng for a moment. So Meng Phantom has a one-piece upper fuselage, very similar to the 1/32 scale Tamiya kit in that regard. And the cockpit basically fits up in there just like that. And it's got two little posts up there on either side, and then back here it's got these little things that it just kind of fits into, and you just glue it, and Bob's your uncle. So that is a nice, easy install. It comes at the price, though, of sidewall details lacking. I don't know why they didn't put any mid firewall detail of any kind. And you're also missing the rear detail of the backseat instrument panel, which is a frustration, but I think it's something that you can easily scratch build. So this whole area is basically just, you want it to seem busy. It doesn't necessarily need to be super accurate. On the other side of the equation, we have the Zoukei-Mura kit, which I've been fiddling with quite a bit to try to get, sorted out here. But basically, having the cockpit sill as part of the cockpit itself complicates things. And I'm not sure complicates them in a good way. So that's all well and good, but as you can see, something just is not hitting quite right with the sill here. And I cannot figure out what it is because there's, fucking fuselage in the way, right? It'll fit fine at a jank-ass angle, but then when you go to straighten it out, it does that. And so I need to figure out why it's doing that. I have my suspicions. But yeah, that is a point of annoyance for sure. And then as we go to bring in the other side, this thing is also cursed with kind of floppy fit until you start gluing massive portions of it together, which obviously you can't do if you want to avoid having, stupid ass sidewall issues there. So that is probably my biggest annoyance with this thing is just, there's a lot of floppiness to hold together back here while you're trying to get the cockpit glued in. And it becomes a tape job, but at the same time, I need to figure out why I'm getting a gap here. But even without the gap, right, even if that glued in just as well as it does over here, you still have to glue that securely because the second you let up, you can have a gap open up in this, and nobody wants that. Nobody's got time for that shit. Yeah, that is the severe downside with the Zoukei-Mura cockpit, is dealing with the sill. Just not a fun time. Okay, so between the Zoukei-Mura and the Meng, which one would I pick? Honestly, it's a bit of a draw. I think the Zoukei-Mura has to be given the nod in terms of detail, in terms of complexity, in terms of the sense of busyness going on, even before the 3D decals come into play. Just, everything about it, it has more going on. It's a busier cockpit. It has sidewall detail. The Ming doesn't have that. What the Ming does have, though, is simplicity. It goes together very easily. You don't have any of this integrated cockpit sill silliness to fuck around with. That's already taken care of. So this thing is just plug and play once you get to the end. And all the stuff that is a detriment here, so the lack of detail on the bulkhead, the could be better side panel detail, the could be better instrument panel detail, etc. All of that can be replaced or added with aftermarket with just enough patience, and I'm sure with enough time for people to really throw down and offer some cool shit. Like, is if you're just using the shell of this thing as the bones and adding everything else onto it, you can still have a drop fit into the fuselage cockpit that looks killer. So I think ultimately, again, it's a draw. If Meng had better detail, if the Zoukei-Mura found a way around this cockpit sill bullshit, they would both be their own best friends, and they would put a lot more of a challenge to the competitor. But that is my take. Sadly, I hate ending these things in a draw, but both of them have major strengths and major weaknesses, and they kind of cancel each other out. So until episode 3, you gotta be shitting me.